Morning, morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Time is now 9:30, so I'm going to resume the hearing. Thank you. Now, this is a rescheduled. There's lots of noises. I'm not quite sure if that's because people are joining. Oh, it's gone quiet again now.
Ms. Wright, have you started your video? Because we can't see you.
Oh, it should have come on.
No, we can't see
Bear
you.
with me. That's probably why everybody's looking a bit blank, because I'm blank. Right, is that better?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't click on it. I didn't notice. I was just checking that everybody was here. My apologies. Thank you. This is as I was starting to say, this is a rescheduled session, continuation of discussions on Wislow. We will be focusing on viability this morning. Now, I will do some very quick introductory points, but I don't think there's necessarily anybody present who hasn't been in sessions before, but I'll quickly go through a few things. My name's Yvonne Wright, and I've got my the other inspector who is present, my other colleague here.
Good morning.
Victoria Lucas, and we've both been jointly appointed to examine this local plan when we're looking at legal compliance and soundness issues. I'm sure you all know Ms. Glancy, and if there are any procedural, practical matters or anything like that, please contact Ms. Glancy. She will be able to assist you. Please also ensure that you keep up to date with the webpage. It is a bit of a moving feast sometimes, things happen. So if you can just try and just keep up to date with that. We also make a request that participants are informed by email as well, if there are any changes that are at last minute or whatever. So just a reminder, this session is being live streamed. Also, please can you ensure that your microphones are off, so they're on mute unless you're speaking, because that just assists with any background noise. And then obviously, I always say this, but it's completely up to you. Please put your cameras on if you can, because it's nice to actually see a face when we're speaking. It's very helpful. In terms of today, we are dealing with viability. We will be going, or myself and my colleague in particular, wish to go through it in quite some detail to just understand the specifics. And we are basing the discussions on the recent document that was recently published in terms of viability for the scheme. So if there are any questions, queries, any further comments, if people can be succinct in expressing those comments. We're not going to be repeating previous discussions, because that's not an effective use of hearing session time. Where necessary, I'm just going to give a little caveat here, where it's necessary in terms of viability to discuss potential infrastructure issues, we may end up having a slight discussion on that, but it's linked with viability. So I will just give that slight caveat just in case. But we're certainly not going to be going back over any other areas at this stage. Okay, just so that you're aware. Now, we will be taking appropriate breaks today. So we'll be taking a mid-morning break. Lunch will be between 1 and 2. If we do go into this afternoon, then I will again do another break mid-afternoon if necessary. Okay. Are there any questions or queries about the procedures or any practical matters? You've all been here before, I'm sure. So, Mr. Jones, Councillor Jones, please.
Good morning, ma'am. I mentioned to Ms. Glancy that unfortunately I'm unable to attend today. I had planned to, but life gets in the way. So I'm going to have to go at 10 o'clock. if I was able to just say a few words before then, it would be much appreciated.
Okay, let me do quick introductions, and then I will come to you, Councillor Jones, first.
Thank you.
Okay. So can I just go down the list then of the participants? It should be very similar to the previous participants list that we had for the previous session, because it's a carryover. Can I start with council, please?
Thank you, Inspector. Good morning, everybody. Mark Russell, Stroud District Council. I won't be joined by any colleagues today, so it's just me. Thank you.
Thank you. Representatives for Seven Homes, please.
Good morning, Ma'am. It's Nathan McLaughlin from McLaughlin Planning, representing Seven Homes.
Thank you. Representatives for Berkeley Vale Ward, please.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Green, District Councillor for Berkeley Vale Ward.
And I am Gordon Craig, also District Councillor for Berkeley Vale Ward.
Thank you. And
Councillor Jones.
You've just introduced you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representatives for Taylor Wimpey, please. No? Okay.
I think we had the message through from Ms Glancy to say that the representatives of Taylor Wimpey are going to observe via YouTube during the session.
Thank you. And National Highways, Ms McCaffrey.
Good morning, Lisa McCaffrey from National Highways. I'm joined today by Zoe Turner from WSP. I have emailed, but I can only make the morning session, so apologies.
I'm actually not anticipating this going beyond this morning, because we're only dealing with viability. So, but we've allowed extra time just in case, because this hearing session seems to extend longer than we anticipate, which is not our normal experience. So that's why we've just given that extra time just in case. If it comes to lunchtime and there are still some outstanding matters you want to comment on, just make sure that you have adequate time and let me know that actually I really need to speak on this. But hopefully we shouldn't get to that point.
Thank you.
Tritex Symmetry.
Good morning, Jonathan Dawes, Tritex Symmetry.
Thank you. Representatives for Hamfallow Parish Council, please. No. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they're here.
No, I don't think they attended the last one. Winslow Action Group representatives, please.
Yeah, Dave Toms representing WAG. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Phil Butcher representing WAG.
Thank you. Slimbridge Parish Council representatives. No,
I'm going to attend.
I know there was a message there where they might not be able to attend. So, okay. And representatives for Redrow Homes, please.
Morning, Ma'am. Matthew Kendrick, Grassroots Planning on behalf of Redrow.
Thank you. Representatives for Robert Hitchins, please.
Morning, Ma'am. Sarah Hamilton-Foyne, Pegasus Group on behalf of Robert Hitchins.
Thank you. Vistry Group? No. And representatives for the landowners, Ernest Trust and GCC Asset Management.
Thank you, Ma'am. Mary Crew from Stantec Planning for the Ernest Cook Trust and Gloucestershire County Council. I'm joined by my colleague John Berry for highways issues. And also, if it's helpful, I can run through the other members of our team. There's Paul Osborne from LHC on Master Planning Design Code, Dwayne Bushell from Ward Williams, Cost Consultant, and finally Tim Watson and Jason Hill from Savills on viability. Thank you.
Thank you. And the Highways Authority.
It's Nathan Drover. I've got Louisa Sante with me.
Thank you. Okay, if I can go directly to Councillor Jones then, please. Because I know you've got to go in literally 20 minutes.
I've got to go in less than that, really, Mum.
Okay. What would you like to say? What's your comment?
Firstly, thank you. I do understand the EIP can't be changed just for one person. It's a real shame. I've attended almost all of the relevant EIP hearings and some that are probably not relevant as well. And I desperately wanted to be on today, but simply can't make it happen. So I just thank my colleagues, councillors Gordon, Craig and Lindsay Green for being on here, and also the Winslow Action Group members who I have spoken with them, and they'll be able to represent most of the questions that I would want to ask. You mentioned earlier that procedural matters should go to Ms. Glancy. Could I just ask a brief one, and you can point me in the right direction?
Certainly.
Last night or yesterday afternoon, I received the invite to this hearing. I think some people received it a few days before. There's a reason for that, and Ms. Glancy helped me out with that, so I thank her for that. Attached to it was a viability appraisal from Savills. And this site has been promoted for 5 years. All other sites have had their viability appraisal delivery appraisals provided months and sometimes years ago. And I wonder why a minute to midnight, effectively, this is dumped on us, I would have to say. We've had less than 36 hours, and if you take the night out of that, it's even less than that, for people, many of whom are just lay people, to be able to understand these figures. Is that reasonable, that they should be expected to provide a properly informed response to these figures when they come at such a late date after they've had 5 years to provide this?
I can understand people's frustrations. We accepted the evidence because it's imperative that we go through it today. So we wanted to accept the document. It was, I only looked at the document last night after yesterday's session. So I will be asking the representatives for the landowners or the site promoters to actually go through that today. So it's unfortunate, but that's the position that we're in. Now, we didn't ask for this information. It was in response to the 3rd of May session, when we said that the next session would be focusing on viability, that the landowners have gone away and done this work. And it's actually quite useful to have it brought together, because there was limited availability beforehand, to actually go through it. So I understand that it means that not everybody has had a chance to have a look at it, but I've only looked at it and my colleague has only looked at it last night. So we're in exactly the same position, but we are actually quite comfortable, because the point of this session is to go through the evidence, is to go through that document.
Well, I thank you for that, and I thank you for actually pushing the promoters to actually do what I believe they should have done a long, long time ago if they thought this was viable. But coming back to your point with respect that, as I say again, some of these people are, in fact, they're all just lay people, and to be able to pick up and try and gather proper evidence to test whether the figures that are provided are accurate is very, very difficult. And I know you're not going to be able to answer that, and you're going to go through it today, but it really does put them in an extremely difficult position.
No, I understand that. If we decide after this that we do want additional responses back from other participants, we will say that. We're not anticipating that at this stage. I've said, or I mentioned, I think on our first day on Wednesday, that we are going to be having a summer break. That will give myself and my colleague time to go over. There's an awful lot of evidence that's been put in as part of the actual hearing sessions, and we have not had the time to digest that information yet. So we will not be saying after this, yes, we will be allowing additional evidence be put forward, or people to be given the opportunity to have their say. We need to consider that and see actually whether we require that, or from the evidence that we've got, is that sufficient for myself and my colleague to make a decision on the viability of this scheme? Because we have to base it on the evidence that's before us at the time. So if you can bear with us we want to go through, that's why we want to spend this morning going through the viability evidence, then myself and my colleague need to go away and actually consider that and decide actually what the next steps are.
Okay, well,
we haven't made that decision yet.
Okay, well, I thank you for that explanation.
But I understand your concerns, and I'm sure there will be others in the room, other developers and site promoters who will be saying, well, we've only looked at it last night as well, and we want a chance to respond. So there may well be others in the hearing session who may also have your concerns, and I fully understand your concerns. But let's just go through the session today. I know you're not going to be here, and I know that's unfortunate. And my apologies that this was the only date that we could fit Winslow in. I know it's just unfortunate. But thank you for raising that issue. It is a concern, but let's just go through the viability evidence today and actually see what it's actually saying. I think that's what's important. We need to understand what it's actually saying first.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. It's concern and frustration in many ways. Myself and my two colleagues from Berkeley Vale are perhaps in slightly different positions than some of the others on here. We deal with residents, and some of them have voiced the opinion that they think, some of the people think it's a game. Well, this game is going to affect the rest of their lives. So the promoters might. No,
my colleague and I fully understand the frustrations, and we did recognise that when we accepted the document that this would be last minute. But the purpose of today is literally to go through the document of this morning, is to go through the document and actually go, okay, what actually is it saying? And does it make sense? And does it include everything that it should include? The percentages and the costings. We will be going through that and scrutinising that.
Oh, okay, well, thank you for that. I will defer to my two Berkeley Vale colleagues and the Winslow Action Group who have been incredible in continuing to pursue this. Could I just pose two questions, and then I'll have to disappear? And these are, I promise, related to viability and deliverability. So please bear with me. Document 955, which is the Ernest Cook Trust and Gloucester County Council Master Plan dated July 2021 in the library. On page 10, there's a map that shows the outline of the site, including bunds. And I've asked this question before, and this is about viability, I promise. As you'll be aware, because I know you visited the site, the motorway is 8 or 10 metres on a causeway above the site. They show an acoustic bund there that is designed to ameliorate the impact of the noise from the motorway. So it would have to be the height of the motorway plus whatever above it. And I understand it's at least 4 metres, and then something maybe more on top of that, planting and what have you. So if it is that high, presumably so it's going to be, I don't know, 12 metres or more high. The base will presumably have to be a commensurately wide base. I'd be just interested to know, A, how high is that bund going to be, and how will the width of the base impact upon the viability, the available land for building effectively? So that's just one question. And the second one of the residents approached me about the route of the high pressure gas pipeline and the costings that have been provided for it. Firstly, it's pointed out it is a high pressure gas pipeline, not a gas main. That's really important. There's a big difference. But Wales and West Utilities seem to be in the dark about the route of this. So if they don't understand where the route is going to be, how can accurate costings be provided for it if we don't know where it's going?
You'll be pleased to hear that these are the exact questions that we will be asking. So you are preempting our questions, Councillor Jones.
Brilliant. Well,
thank you. Pleased to hear.
Thank you very much for that, and to your allowing me to speak. Oh, you've gone off. You're on. Sorry, ma'am. I clicked mute before I went. I was desperate to get out the door. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And before anybody says otherwise, I know the last question that Councillor Jones asked was making it clear that it's a high pressure gas pipeline. That is actually set out in the evidence that it's a high pressure gas pipeline. So we are fully aware that it's a high pressure gas pipeline. To be fair, it would be, the low pressure gas pipeline actually doesn't make sense in terms of this of what the evidence is saying. Okay, so thank you for that. Can we then we're going to go directly into the document. So it's the 16th of June document. So I would like, I'm not quite sure who's going to be from the team is going to be going through this document. But I really do want to literally go through the document itself to just clarify exactly what's been brought forward. Now, we understand the caveats with this in terms of this is a higher level. It's a viability assessment that's been done. It's of its time. It's at a particular point in time. Detailed elements that would come forward as part of a planning application haven't been, or the further work hasn't been carried out yet. That is pretty normal in terms of progressing any applications or progressing any sites, but we do have concerns about the costings and the viability in relation to that. So that's why we want to go through the document in terms of giving us an understanding of what it's saying. And then on the back of that, we may have some questions to actually just understand some of the costings, because some of the costings to us don't quite make sense. And they have been raised before, but if we'd like an understanding first before we make a judgment of any kind, and we're not going to be making a judgment today, except if we still have concerns after we've gone through this, we will make that clear. So is it going to be Ms. Crew? Are you going to be heading this up?
Thank you, Inspector. If I can just provide a very brief introduction and in some way respond to Councillor Jones, if I may. Firstly, I think it's very important to remind everybody that the master plan for Wislow has been available for some time and then supplemented by a detailed design code. The way in which we've progressed the site on behalf of our clients is to produce a very robust design code which meets the aspirations of the clients and the future intentions for Wislow. By doing that, we have always had a very, very close handle on the viability, on the deliverability, and we felt that the best way to present Wislow was through that master plan and through that design code. It was all backed up by our own viability and deliverability work, which has always been ongoing in the background. I accept that we have presented it late in the day, but it's always been leading us to develop the design code that you have seen. So in that respect, we are very confident on the numbers, and we have produced a robust design code which has a deliverable scheme for Wislow. We're very happy to essentially page turn the most recent information we've presented. That would be undertaken, led by Mr. Bushell from Ward Williams. So if you would like to do that, if that's the most productive way, then Mr. Bushell will take us through, if that's okay.
I think it would just be useful, as it literally, I've had a look at this document last night, so it would just be useful to just go through. It doesn't necessarily have to be page by page, but to just give us an understanding of, and you've just set the scene by saying that this has always been in the background and work has been carried out on this for a while. But I would like to go through and understand specific costings and where those have come from and how those have been determined, whether they are estimates, whether they are actually backed by evidence, by specific discussions or whatever. That would be useful to go through the specifics.
Okay, well, in that case, if I can hand over to Dwayne Bushell from Ward Williams and we can open that discussion. Thank you.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Mr. Bushell?
Morning. Hi.
Morning.
Hi. So, well, I can do the poster as Mary suggests, or I can respond to the questions that you have specifically, whichever you prefer.
I think it would be useful. I mean, the appraisal makes it very clear. You know, it's very clearly set out. it would be useful to just understand the overview. You've got the overview. Unfortunately, it's not page numbered, but you've got the overview of key assumptions that have been included within the appraisal. So I think to go through those key assumptions would be useful to understand whether there are any differences to what would be normal practice in relation to the industry sort of standards for the values and costings that are set out, or whether there are particular differences because of where the location is or because of the site. You don't necessarily have to go through every single value cost that's set out on that, but if you can just highlight why you set out the assumptions as you have and where they could have come from.
Okay.
So for instance, the residential, you've got the gross development value figures there. So are they, is that industry standard, or are they specific to this site, or how have they been created?
So they've been put together by Savills, and they're benchmarked against the industry norms and what they would expect to see on other strategic sites.
Ma'am, if I may step in there on the values, we have appraised the scheme looking at comparable evidence and also in consultation with our internal agents and external agents. So we've got £330 a square foot as an average across the scheme for the private. We've made a suitable allowance for affordable as well at £198 a square foot. So that gives us our total residential GDV, which you see in the appraisal. So that is based on evidence.
That's based on
comparable sales evidence from other schemes across the district, notably.
So it's local. You're coming from local evidence
from within the vicinity of the site.
Okay, and is that the case for employment GDV that you've got down there?
The employment GDV at this stage is an assumed service land. So within our infrastructure budgets, which Dwayne will discuss in a moment, that site will be, those elements will be serviced. At this stage, we've just employed a pounds per net serviced acre, quite high level assumption for those two elements. We have had engagement last year with a number of local businesses, so we believe there is demand for those uses and elements, but that is not driven by specific local comparable evidence at this stage.
And the same for local centre, because that's an assumed.
It's the same for local centre.
Assumed receipt. Okay.
Yes.
You make it clear that the construction costs per plot is based on the BCIS costings, which is normal practice. Is that the most up-to-date costings?
Yes, these costings are up to date and adjusted appropriately.
The net zero allowance. Now you say in the commentary that this is based on discussions with several house builders, I presume local house builders. Just explain that in a little bit more detail as to how you come to the 7,000 per plot figure.
We have marketed and indeed sold in the not so distant past a site. It wasn't a local site actually. It was slightly further away. But it was an eco site, and we had offers in from a number of house builders, and the range that they had specifically attributed to carbon zero type elements was between £5,000 and £7,000 a plot, and so we've adopted £7,000 here.
Was that for following Garden City principles? An example, or would that give any additional costs because of Garden City principles, which sort of go?
So we'll no doubt come on to it when we talk about the infrastructure, because the garden village, Garden City principles are embedded both in infrastructure, open space, as well as fabric of buildings. This is a fabric of building additional cost designed to meet carbon zero standards.
Okay.
So there will be other costs in the appraisal which also lend themselves towards the Garden Village.
Absolutely, and we can go through that a little bit later. The contingency, 5%.
That is an industry standard for a site of this nature. There are other contingencies built in to the infrastructure as well, which Dwayne will no doubt come on to.
We will come on to that, yes. Just so I don't forget at the moment, are there any particular abnormals that have not been taken into account? Is there a need for an abnormals costings at all? I know we've got the gas pipeline, which is an abnormal for the site, but it's already set out in the costings, isn't it? But is there anything else?
I mean, this is a high level appraisal at this stage, so no doubt further detail will become clear in the future. But at this stage, no, there are no other abnormals. There is a 5% contingency within our figures, and then appropriate contingency elsewhere.
Okay. I'm not going to go through the figures for the primary infrastructure at the moment. That's set at almost 19 million. So we'll come to that when we come to the specifics, and when we start to go through the actual appraisal and what the appraisal is setting out. But is that based on, because this is the groundworks, basically, as people call it, it's primary infrastructure, it's the groundworks, and putting in the road, the infrastructure, the site infrastructure. Is this based on best practice, industry standards, or are there again specifics for the site?
Yeah, so it's based on current standards from the county, current national highway standards. It's benchmarked against regional schemes, and it's measured against the master plan. So it's specific to the site, but the costs themselves are benchmarked against the standards.
And within that, you've got a 10% risk.
Yes.
Now, your public open space costing, that's obviously must be specific to the site.
Correct.
Yep. Based on
contemporaneous schemes and the areas that we have on site.
Thank you. And it's inclusive of the noise fund, which I know that Councillor Jones has raised, and it was raised previously as well. Is there a response? I know we're sort of moving slightly away from viability here, but is there a response on Councillor Jones's concerns about the height of the bund and impact on land take to achieve that bund, and the capacity of the site to deliver the development? I would imagine your master planning person may well wish to respond to that. Is that Mr. Osborne?
Yes, hi, good morning, ma'am. I will chip in. The areas we have allowed for in the master plan are sufficient to deliver the scale of bunds that are required. So, for example, in the northern part of land where the motorway is roughly at grade, the land take is less, but we still have about a 50-metre wide corridor along there to enable us to create that bund. On the southern side, as Councillor Jones was saying, motorway is elevated. We've allowed for a larger bund, and there's about a 70 to 80 metre wide buffer area, which is part of the green infrastructure for the site. So it's delivering multifunctional benefits, not just the noise bund, but landscape functionality as well. And that is sufficient for us to get the height of 4 to 5 metres above the motorway for the bund, plus then there's a fence allowed for within that. So the indicative section that's shown in the master plan report is showing how the concept will work. We tested that and allowed for sufficient land area to deliver it. And then the second part of that answer is, and Mr. Mitchell might be able to expand on that more if it's helpful, is that's allowed for then and been costed in the cost plan. So we looked at the cut and fill at a high level at this stage, but looked at the cut and fill on the site and what material will be available from the attenuation areas, the construction works and so on, but also there's an opportunity for the site to absorb material from other construction sites in the area, which will help with wider reduction in kind of landfill and so on, and use that as part of that material, which would be possibly a cost benefit for the scheme.
Okay. So that's all been taken into account for the costings that's set out in here. And I recognise it's at a high level because the detailed element hasn't been provided yet. That will come as the master planning progresses to the. Yeah, but it's a good. Are you saying then this is a good estimation at this time as to how much that would cost?
Absolutely, yes. I think that, well, Dwayne, I'll let you answer that if that's okay. Thank you, Mark.
Well, same answer. Yes, it's as good as it can get at this stage.
Okay. I won't ask it now, but there is a question that we want to ask later on, which will be about how cautious these figures are in relation to as a development site progresses, subject to this actually going forward, subject to staying as an allocation, etc. It's the impact on costings and how cautious these figures are. I don't necessarily want that answer now. We will be coming to that, and it may be that the cautiousness, because costings change. We see it in the news all the time that a road building scheme, we're talking national schemes here, but a road building scheme has changed within several months or a year or so, and the costings have skyrocketed or whatever. Now, I'm not saying that that's obviously the scale of development here at all, but we will want to just have a discussion about that a little bit later on. Let's just continue going through then. The section 278 works. Does that come from the County Council based on?
It's based on schemes on the County Council network. So it's benchmarked contemporaneously against rates and standards.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just jump in here and ask where the costs for contributing towards the junction improvements for the M5 are shown?
They are generally within the IDP figures within.
Yes, the IDP 2020 figures, isn't it? Is that
correct? Yes.
The 2022? You've got the addendum figures, haven't you? Because you've got 15 million and you've got 13.6 million, which are further down. We haven't got there yet.
Yes.
Okay. You've got the bus improvement works.
Yes.
So you've said that's based on Stagecoach. So you've had discussions with Stagecoach to come up with that figure, or is it generally a rough or an estimate?
It is. It was generated by the transport consultants.
Okay.
In liaison with. Here we go.
Ma'am, if I may interject on that point, essentially.
Yes, please, Mr. Berry.
I can confirm that we've had dialogue with Stagecoach for at least a couple of years now, essentially. So we've liaised with them closely in terms of obviously the proposed routing and the Pacific service that is supposed to be upgraded, essentially, and then along with the associated costs, and that's all covered essentially within Stagecoach's most recent representations to yourselves, essentially, which sit on the examination library. So those costs are effectively reflected within the report, essentially, are in keeping with effectively the representations made by Stagecoach in that regard.
Okay, so it's based on those discussions and based on the evidence that's already in the library.
Indeed, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. The M5 bridge, this is the pedestrian cycle bridge, and I know you set it out that you've benchmarked it against the Micklewood service station footbridge, the new footbridge across there. We will be coming back to this because myself and my colleague have some queries around the costings on that. But I just want to go through all of these generally before we come to the appraisal, because these are the assumptions that have been put into the appraisal, and then we'll go through the appraisal in a little bit more detail. So I'll come back to that. The gas main diversion as well, we'll come back to that because you've got it down as 2.2 million, and it's based on gas feasibility study that has been carried out. So does this mean that this has been considered in conjunction with Wales and West Utilities? Because Councillor Jones seemed to imply that no discussion has been had with Wales and West Utilities.
So it's been prepared in consultation with our consultants, which are called, can anyone help have it in front of me?
Mr. Bushell, if I may, it's Mary again. It's the way that Wales and West Utilities operate, I'm sure people know, is when requested to provide an estimate, we pay Wales and West Utilities a fee, and they commission a specialist company. In our case, Fingleton White undertook the work to do the cost estimate. So it's that report which is commissioned by Wales and West Utilities and paid for by the landowners to attribute the costs at this stage of desk space exercise for rerouting the high pressure gas main.
Okay. Because it was the comment made by Councillor Jones, and it was made in the previous session about whether Wales and West were aware of this, but obviously they have been aware of it because they commissioned the report. It's whether they've had further input into that following the report. But if they've commissioned the report, they must be. Are you saying that they are content with that report at this stage? Obviously, it's a feasibility study.
Yes, so the way in which the report is produced, in this case by Fingleton White, it is issued by Fingleton White to Wales and West Utilities. Only once they are content with it do they issue it to us. So by virtue of doing that, they endorse it. And since that report was produced, we have been in regular contact with Wales and West Utilities. They've had some changes in how they manage things, and we've had updated figures as recently as last week. So that this has been a sort of live, ongoing discussion with Wales and West Utilities from my utilities colleagues at Stantec. So yes, it's ongoing, it's live, they're fully briefed, and that's a standard practice to get the Fingleton White to do their costings. Okay, again, that's an area we want to come back to. We do want a more detailed discussion on the M5 bridge and on the pipeline. So we will come back to that. I just want to go through the other assumptions first. Mr. Osborne, you did have your hand up. I didn't want to miss what you wanted to say, or do you want to come back later?
Sorry, Mo, if you're coming back, but I was say, if it would be helpful, that report is in our appendices document, section B2. I think I mentioned it last time actually, but it's.
Can you just remind me which? I've got lots of different documents up at the moment. So could you just remind me the document number so I can pull it up?
Right, I don't know the document number to hand on the examination website. Apologies, but it's the additional reports to our master plan. And if you bear me, can I come back to you and confirm that if that's helpful?
That'd be helpful. Yeah, I will just continue to go through the assumptions that have been made first. Thank you. You've got an indexation assumption. Let's come to the IDP elements, and again we will need to just go through that in a bit more detail. Once we finish going through all of the assumptions, the IDP, you've got the IDP 2020 and then you've got the addendum costings added on there. So that's literally just an addition of the costings that are set out in the IDP. Or have there been any changes? Taking into account what the comment says.
Yeah, sorry, that's correct.
But it excludes school and community facilities because they've been costed separately. We'll come to those in a moment. Yeah. Okay. And you've got the specific section 106 costings. So that's where schools, etc., come in, because they always come under and community elements. Okay. And then you've got your professional fees. You've given the on-parcel professional fees is 4%. The site-wide professional fees, there will be a mix of professional fees in there, but are there particular percentages that you can give that have been put forward so we can understand whether or are they just industry standard? Or are there particular higher cost professional fees that are necessary because of the particular constraints or whatever on the site?
They are benchmarked. I mean, there is a schedule that's been put together, indicative schedule that we've used, which is the figure that's been brought forth. But that benchmarked against.
I mean, you said it out that it's benchmarked, but I just wanted to see whether there was anything in particular in terms of professional fees that are necessary. I'm thinking particularly in relation to the gas pipeline, whether there is a particular professional fee relating to that is a higher cost or a higher percentage, or the M5 bridge, etc., or whether that's all taken account of in the professional fees.
They're all taken account of within that 9.4 figure. Okay.
And then the developer profit margin, you've got a GDV of 19%.
Correct.
23% based on cost.
Yes, we've given it both on a GDV and per cost basis, which is and that's a market standard.
Which is that's really helpful to have both. So thank you for that. Okay. Can we then just go back, and I'd like to just focus on particular elements then, now because that's been very helpful to just go through that. So I know this was produced sort of last minute, but it's actually very helpful to have it all set out. So we do appreciate having that ability to just run through, because otherwise we would have been going through and trying, actually literally writing down all of these elements, because we'd be doing exactly the same today, but without having this document in front of us. Can we just go back to the M5 bridge and the costings relating to that and the realism of this pedestrian and cycleway bridge in terms of the viability and the deliverability of that? Now, we recognise it's at very early stages. The specifics have not been developed. There are certain parameters that have been highlighted, that it must be a single span, it needs to span the hard shoulders, the 6 lanes of the motorway, etc. There is it's been highlighted in your transport reports that there is a particular land take that is necessary to get the ramped access, and that's been taken into account in the master planning process. I suppose what we're trying to understand is what, or if, and I think we touched on this in the previous session, but I'd just like to just make sure that we fully understand this, excuse me. What discussions have been had with National Highways, and whether there are any issues. I know that it was highlighted last time, and I think the answer was there were no issues, or didn't anticipate any issues, because the span can be, because it would be on your land, on the Wislow site, and then on the other side, you seem to imply that it, again, land availability wasn't an issue on the other side either. And we just would like to understand the costing element of that. We recognise it's based on you've based it on this Micklewood footbridge. We would just like to understand what that entailed, whether that was a similar scheme, because a footbridge at a service station is slightly different to what this would be, and whether there would be any either additional or even lesser costs associated with this. I don't know. That's why we need to just understand that. Now, I recognise, Ms. Crew, you've got your hand up, and then I've got Mr. Berry, you've got your hand up as well. So, Ms. Crew, do you want to?
Thank you, Inspector. Just very briefly to set a little more context, I think, in terms of the bridge, and essentially to shut this issue down of whether it will be delivered or not. We've always considered that the PED cycle bridge over them 5 is integral to the Winslow scheme, and in fact we welcome the suggestion by Mr. Drover at the infrastructure hearing session that the bridge should be included within the policy for Winslow, that it would be delivered at an early stage. In correspondence with Mr. Russell on this, we've accepted that additional policy clause formally to the Winslow policy, such that it will read that the bridge will be in place at an early stage of the development. So we are committed to that bridge. We have always thought that it is, as I said, an integral part of Winslow, and that early delivery will ensure that those trips across the bridge and making it much easier to the station are embedded in the Winslow development. So I think that's important to state from the beginning. In terms of the costings, you can imagine there's been a lot of work from a technical perspective to look at those bridge costings from bridge engineers at Stantec, and also in conjunction speaking with National Highways, and also Mr. Drover at Gloucestershire Highways. So they are as accurate and proportionate at this stage, we feel. So I'm sure my colleagues with more technical experience, including Mr. Berry, will be able to elaborate on that, and perhaps Mr. Drover as well, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Mr. Berry then, please.
Yes, ma'am. You sort of inquired essentially in terms of dialogue that have been held with kind of National Highways.
I'm struggling to hear you, so I don't know whether you need to come closer to your.
Yeah, ma'am. Is that better, ma'am?
Yeah. Or put your mic's volume up. Yeah, that's better.
You inquired, ma'am, about obviously dialogue that have been held with kind of National Highways with regards to the bridge, and I can confirm that dialogue really started around kind of 2019 when we were first talking to them about the principle essentially of the bridge. Essentially, at the same time we were engaging with the local highway authority. So we've had extensive dialogue essentially with given extensive consideration to this essentially for a long time essentially. So yes, so that principle sort of extends all in terms of that agreement in principle extends all the way back to 2019, and then obviously we've then done further technical work essentially to build upon that as set out within the kind of the bridge feasibility reports that accompanied our access movement framework that sits on the library essentially, to evidence effectively how that can be achieved in a single span essentially, on the basis that our clients control land on both sides of the M5.
Thank you. Yeah, we recognise that the land ownership either side is not an issue, because that was raised at the last session, and the response was that it wasn't an issue. So thank you. And actually getting a span across the motorway is not an issue. We know that's been engineered and previously, and it's not a problem. So thank you for that. I'm going to come to Ms. McCaffrey, and then I know that I've got several hands up. I'm going to do Ms. McCaffrey, Mr. Drover, then I'll come to Councillor Green and Mr. Toombs. Okay, so Ms. McCaffrey, please.
Thanks. It was a similar question to the question you've asked, actually. It'd be interesting to know who at National Highways had commented on the bridge, and if discussions had started in 2019, in line with what you said, it is right to assume that costs may have gone up.
I'm struggling to hear you. It's very muffled.
Is that any better?
No, it is a little bit muffled.
Let me try a headset.
Sometimes headsets are better, sometimes Thank you. It's just really important that we hear what you have to say from National Highways. So thank you. Yes.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Similar question to yours. It would be interesting to know who at National Highways the applicant had been speaking with. And again, in line with what you've asked, if conversations had started in 2019, costs are on the rise. So has consideration been given to that? Whilst the examination has been happening, I am asking our bridges team questions. The response at the moment is the ballpark figure appears appropriate. However, it's when you get into the detail that may rise. And then a slightly separate question in terms of the bunt, whilst absolutely that can be dealt with through planning and normally would be, again, depending on height, location, geotech, the cost of that could considerably rise. So it's just two things I wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you.
Could I just ask as well, Ms McCaffrey, while you're there, that figure from your perspective, would that take into account sort of costs in terms of highway works, obviously closing the motorway whilst the bridge is sort of put into place, and then in terms of arrangements for ongoing maintenance of the structure?
Do you know what, you've actually asked something I was going to ask, is the cumulative maintenance sum. So we would ask for 120 years, and I assume that isn't included looking at the costs. I'm guessing they've included TM, but I don't know without looking through, and I can do that, but I don't have it in front of me at the moment.
We will ask for that response from the.
Could I just clarify, sorry, just for a rough ballpark figure for 120 years worth of maintenance, what sort of amount are we talking about roughly?
Can I come back to you, because I'm not the bridge expert, but I will tap away and get the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to continue going down. I know we need responses to these questions, but if we can continue to go down the list at this stage, we're just on the M5 bridge, not on anything else. And then I will ensure that the landowners team has a chance to respond back on some points. So just make a list of the points that you need to come back on. Mr. Drover, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, so we had similar questions following the last session, and we hadn't received clarification from the Michael services costings. I did find the figure eventually. The Michael Wood one is slightly different. The land is higher, slightly higher at the side, so there would be an increased cost at this location. And the Michael Wood services one, obviously, there's not many cyclists at service stations. So now with Active Travel England as a consultee, it may be that a greater width might be required. So there could be, I mean, they're not big costs. There could be a proportional increase in cost. The maintenance issue is quite interesting. So, well, depending on your the way that works is it uses the maintenance costs. If National Highways take it or GCC take the bridge. Sorry, I should point out I'm acting as GCC as Highway Authorities,
yes,
and not as an asset manager. That it uses a present net value calculation over a period of time. So National Highways' approach is 120 years. Some authorities use 60 years. The county council's commuter sums for maintenance on structures generally turn out to be about 30% of the capital costs as a sort of ready reckoner, but that's for a shorter commuted sum period. If you have the longer period, it quite often includes replacing part of the bridge, which massively increases the cost. So I'd allowed 30%, and I was at 5 million before we had this session. So we were differing a little bit on that. But of course, that from the county council's perspective, whether or not they charge a commute sum is dependent on a number of other factors, and one of them being is called betterment. So quite often the developer's structure is replacing an existing structure. So if we had a maintenance liability, we wouldn't obviously charge some for getting a nice new bridge. Often it's meeting a strategic walking and cycling need. This is in our local transport plan, and we would be building ourselves anyway, and we wouldn't be charging commuters for something.
Mr. Drover, we're actually losing you. So would you like to would you like to just turn your video off and see if that makes a difference?
Yeah, sorry, will do.
Thank you. Okay, if you want to try and continue and we didn't catch your last point.
Yeah, so is that any better?
That is better, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I've lost my track now. So yeah, we charge an approximate guide is 30%, and this issue of betterment always comes in to the discussion. So if a developer is providing a strategic link which meets our local transport plan requirements, and we would be building ourselves anyway, then we wouldn't charge a commuted sum. But if it was, I don't know, a bridge across a watercourse into an IKEA car park, then clearly it's solely benefiting a private sector function, then the full commuted sum costs would be added. So my only cautionary note with that amount is, one, the bridge might be slightly higher or might have the land raised either side. Two, it might be slightly wider. Three, there may be, depending on the final maintenance regime, there will be a maintenance commute sum for maintenance, and that setting aside Gloucestershire's role as landowner, as it that would be down to whether or not the bridge was serving a strategic function, which obviously is to some degree, connecting settlements to the north to the rail station. But that would be a discussion we'd have at the development management process. For the purposes of viability, we just have to factor in a allowance for maintenance, I think.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to come to Councillor Green and then Mr. Toombs, and I will come back to Ms. McCaffrey before I go to, because I think you've got some information that you want to impart to us. So I will come back to you, Ms. McCaffrey. So Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I was just slightly concerned with the costings for the M5 bridge. And I think my main issue, although it has been kind of covered by other people, I think what we have to remember is that the bridge at Michael Wood Services, that was actually probably commissioned quite some time ago. So I'm just worried about, obviously, the inflationary rises in construction costs and things like that. I think it was something that I was going to raise about the maintenance, but that has already been raised. So it was just that one point. Thank you.
Thank you, and a perfectly valid point. So thank you for raising that. Mr. Toombs, please.
Yeah, thank you, Inspector. I've got a couple of points, really. One is to point out there's been incredible variation in the estimates for this bridge. Stantec's original estimate was 6 million. It then mysteriously went down to 1 million. It's now to 3.766 million. I'm a little surprised about this, but we will pass over that one. The second one is that if you look at the plan of the bridge, there's one feature which hasn't been taken account of, and that is if you wish to access the station from the end of the bridge. So in order to get that, it's a pedestrian bridge with cycle. You need to go over a railway bridge. And this, in fact, is an old railway bridge. It is narrow, it doesn't have a footpath, and it takes a lot of traffic. I'm not talking about the A4135, I'm talking about the bridge near the station. Now, it's going to be very, very unsafe for cyclists and pedestrians to actually use that bridge. I would also add that I believe that it's a listed structure, which could cause considerable problems regarding modification. I contend that that is a serious issue and has been totally ignored. I suggest everyone looks at the map. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Toombs. We'll come back to that point when we once we've looked at the other aspects. So I won't forget that. Okay, Ms. McCaffrey, please.
Yeah, thank you. Tapping away as I'm listening. So our SES structures team have come back to me and said that the commuter maintenance would be around 30% of the capital cost of delivering the bridge. Just to make it clear, it would become a National Highways asset because it is over our network, and therefore we do take on the responsibility once it's been developed to own that and look after it for the wider sort of community. Just that 30%, that will depend on the materials. So again, knowing what the bridge is built or made of, that number, the capital cost number, could well increase.
And did you have any,
sorry, go on.
Did you have any clarity on the figure for TM?
No, I can go back on that. It will be someone else, and TM is quite extensive at the moment, but if you let me take it away, I will come back.
Thank you. Now, my query was going to be on the 30% maintenance. Does that take into account any replacement, or is that at the National Highways risk?
Well, we'll take the amount for 100, so the cost is on 120 years, and then it is for National Highways to decide what they do over that period. And yes, it normally includes one deck replacement over that period.
Okay. So that's covered within the 30% maintenance cost?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I'd just be interested as well, while we've got Ms. McCaffrey on, there's been a couple of comments about sort of the potential costs put forward for the bridge 3.7, and sort of several participants so far have suggested that that's going to be at the lower end of the cost estimate due to a variety. We've got this sort of benchmark against the Micklewood services and the fact that the topography is different on this site. You've got different land levels. The width might need to be bigger to accommodate cyclists, which obviously you're not going to get so much on a motorway services, and also potential breadth of it as well might be different. I wondered, and also cost inflation. That's also been a valid point raised. That obviously the Micklewood services would have been commissioned some time ago. I just wondered if, in your view / experience, 3.7 is a realistic figure. Would it be reasonable to say that's at the lower end of the estimate, and if so, what would be the upper end of the estimate, just so we have an understanding of the breadth that potentially costs might rise to?
Again, do you mind if I take that away? I've got a gut feeling, but I'm not a bridge expert, so I don't want to give you my gut feeling and that be wrong. So I've got the question about TM, and I've got the question about costings and whether that's appropriate. When I've asked the question this morning, it looks like a ballpark, but that could go up or down. So I understand that, that's quite a generic answer. And then I've also had a response that said cost inflation's up by 20%. But if I take that away, I will come back during this morning session, if that's okay.
That's fine, and I think particularly if you could ask your sort of bridge experts to perhaps consider the differences between the Micklewood services scheme and what's being proposed here, because obviously if it's been benchmarked against those costs, then it's not just about costs inflation over time, it's about differences in the site and the different engineering solutions that might be required.
Yeah, and I would say, just from own knowledge, the service, and someone mentioned it may have been Ms. Wright, the bridge for the services would be different to a public bridge that is accessed, you know, for walking and cycling solely. But yes, I will take those away.
Thank you.
I mean, it could be that it is very similar in terms of costings, but I suppose we just need that clarification as to whether it is similar or whether it does add to cost or whether it reduces cost for some reason. That's what we just want to understand. It's just a ballpark sort of understanding, really. So thank you for that. Councillor Green, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. It was just to ask Ms. McCaffrey if whether or not they can get any costings on any other similar bridges that have been done for this sort of thing, that maybe that might provide some more clarity on costings.
I think probably, hopefully, when she goes away and considers what I've just asked her, that would probably encompass that question, because I would imagine they'll look at similar schemes to give us an idea of costings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let's give the landowners a chance to respond then, because I'm sure you might have some, you might well have some answers to the questions that have been raised. So, Mr. Bushell, please.
Is that working? Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to discuss there and respond to. But in the first instance, the comparison between Michael Wood service station and the bridge that we're looking to construct here, it's for benchmarking purposes only. So they are similar. The similarities are that they're a bridge, but you know, the assumption that the bridge at Wieslow will cost more is probably flawed insofar as the approach to the bridge is fundamentally different. So at Michael Wood, you're going from a lower level steps and a ramp to get to a deck, whereas on the site we're proposing, or the bridge that we're proposing to construct, will be a deck. But of course, we've got the bund on one side. So the approach to the bridge is fundamentally different. So there's a deck, and then it is quite similar on the other side to one extent or another. So that's the first bit. So they are different, the similarities being the deck. Of course, there's sides, but there's no roof. It might be slightly wider, but that's a material cost. It's not necessarily a additional cost for construction purposes. So the TM won't be any more if the bridge is a little bit wider. The civil cost will be a little bit more, but they won't necessarily take much longer. So they're not huge cost considerations. The other point to bring up as well was on traffic management. We have allowed for traffic management. The traffic management is fairly limited because it's a spanning bridge from one side to another. The TM is only really going to be required when the span of the bridge is craned into place, which is an important component. Deals with that piece. The other one was about cost and about the gestation of cost over time. We had the point was made about 6.1 and now 3.8. I think that again connects into the way the bridge is going to be constructed. So now that, as Mary mentioned, we've accepted that we will deliver the bridge at an early stage, we're going to be closer to the point of construction. So we're going to have already put in a section of road, and we will be closer with some enabling works already have happened to make it easier to make an area for a contractor to enable the site. And that's a fundamental difference to what was originally costed. So if you looked at the scheme cold and we're going to build a bridge here, a contractor's got to find his way to the site. We've already created the way into the site, which is important. The next part on it.
Clarify just while you're there, how much in that figure have you allowed for TM then?
£350,000 plus 10% contingency.
Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
That's okay. The next piece then was on the commuted sum. I totally, I understand the conversation. It is subject to, as National Highways pointed out, it's subject to the materials that we use as well. So one can extend the lifespan of the structure, and the commuted sum will reduce accordingly. This is high level, so we've made an allowance for a commuted sum. And I have been looking through my notes and seeing where it's costed within the appraisal, and it's in the wording, which is unhelpful actually. But within the site-wide professional fees, we've got an allowance for commuted sums in there, which I accept is rather unhelpful in terms of its wording. The other point as well, just on the Michael Wood service station, in terms of the span, that is at that point the motorway is six lanes wide, and it does have the hard shoulder on both sides. So in terms of span, it is similar to what the M5 is like, where we're proposing to put the bridge here. And that's all from me.
Is there a response on the issue that was raised by Mr. Toombs about access actually across the railway from that cycle route? I'm not sure whether it would be Mr. Bushell or whether it would be somebody else who could respond on that. It's referenced at point 6 on one of your plans, on your phase W2 plan, as part of the appraisal.
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Thank you, Mr. Berry.
In relation to that. So yes, so we have considered that very issue that was kind of referred to in terms of, in fact, the need for improvements to the bridge immediately next to the railway station, essentially the existing one as is. That would effectively complement that desire line, essentially from our new bridge, effectively to the railway station, essentially. So we've set out within our access movement framework, and there's a specific drawing that sets out effectively how we would look to introduce a new section of footway effectively across that bridge, essentially through a shuttle working arrangements and the potential to signalise that bridge, essentially, because traffic flows across it are relatively modest, essentially. So we'd effectively look to achieve that pedestrian connectivity point of view from that perspective.
Can I also point out, I think Mr. Toombs may be incorrect in stating that it may have been a listed structure.
I'm not sure who said that.
Sorry, it was Jason
Mr.
Hill.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Hill. So that one's not a listed structure. Can you confirm that? Or
Mark Russell was nodding his head and may have more historic facts, but under
excellent. I've got 2 hands up here, so I will go to Mr. Russell, then I'll go back to Mr. Toombs. So thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Russell?
Thank you. I wasn't present at the session, but I understand that the matter was discussed briefly in the session on CAM by John Fulcher. So we checked our records and we can find no reference to the bridge being listed.
Okay. Okay. Anything further, Mr. Russell?
No, nothing in terms of that specific point. I just make the more general point that obviously there's been a lot of attention to costs potentially going up, but we must remember, and this is something that we'll no doubt come to in the session on the overall plan viability, that our viability assessment work has identified that costs have risen significantly, but sales values have also risen, actually proportionately slightly more.
Fully aware of that, yeah.
So I just wanted to put that in
costs increasing. Yeah.
Just wanted to put that in balance. I know you did cover sales values at the beginning, but we didn't really have a discussion around whether those sales values potentially are, could increase over time. So I just wanted to put that overall.
No, thank you, Mr. Russell. That has, yes, we didn't make that clear, but that's implicit that that would happen. So it's an assumption that we already know about anyway. But thank you for making that that known. Absolutely, just as costs go up, then quite often the obviously sales values go up. So it needs to be balanced out. So thank you, Mr. Toombs, please.
Thank you, Inspector. I think Mr. Fulcher on Wednesday was referring to the bridge over the A4135, not the bridge near the railway station.
I did wonder that, because that was what I was thinking, but
that is correct.
An understanding.
That is
yes,
correct.
I don't think we were discussing this bridge, which is the one next to the railway station.
That is correct. I would be very interested in Network Rail's view on this, because I don't believe they've been consulted, or perhaps I could be wrong. Thank you.
Apologies, by the way. Obviously, I said I wasn't at the session. I'm just reading some notes from a colleague. So
no, that's fine, Mr.
We'll check that. We'll check that.
That's absolutely fine. I suppose it's just understanding if it depends on what changes are proposed, isn't it, and whether a listing actually affects that. If it's just changing, if the bridge isn't proposed to be widened, it's not proposed to be, it's been put forward as being signalised, then it's the impact on a listing or on a listed structure is well, there's less impact, isn't there, if you're not making a bridge wider or affecting the bridge in terms of creating just changing the bridge in some way. So I just wanted to understand and just clarify exactly what was proposed just at that end. That's all. Who would like to just? I know I've got several hands up, so
can I come back on that one, because I think it's very important. This certainly seems to be a risk which has not been evaluated correctly. And I will state again, there is no footpath over that bridge. So even if it's signalised, it is going to be very dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. Thank you very much. That's all I need to say.
Thank you, Mr. Toombs. Well, let's have a response from the landowners. I'm not sure who wants to go first. I've got Mr. Hill and then Mr. Osborne.
Yeah, just on the point of the, if I may, just come back on the sales prices briefly. My colleague, Mr. Watson, was explaining that we'd use comparable evidence. We haven't added in the extra value, which is proven to be delivered in garden villages and settlements of this scale, where placemaking adds further value over and above standard house building. We have applied standard house building prices here in accordance, but those figures are therefore, in our mind, conservative. I will leave Paul, my colleague, to respond on the bridge and the signalling methods that are proposed, which in all effect should provide safety. That is the reason they would be brought in.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mum, thank you. John Barry will respond to the detail. I've just double checked on the Historic England website, and as Mr. Russell said, the bridge isn't reported as being listed there. So I think we're fairly confident that the bridge isn't listed. And in our additional reports document, which I mentioned earlier, in the Highways and Access report on page 189, there's a plan showing the proposals for the signalisation of that junction and putting in a narrowing for vehicles to allow a pedestrian cycle crossing on that bridge, as Mr. Brady described a minute ago. So that is setting out what that approach would be to achieve improvement to that link, which is above the existing situation. And sorry, I said earlier I'd confirm where that report is. I can't find it in the examination library. It was submitted as part of the Reg 18, alongside the master plan and the other documents at that stage. So the Winslow master plan documents that are all submitted, this is the appendices to that, which was submitted as part of our Reg 18 submission to local plan. Apologies, I can't see it immediately on the examination library.
It would be helpful if the council can just clarify whether it's on the examination library.
Yes, I can. It's actually the Reg 20 reps, so it's 955.
Okay.
And it was submitted as at the Reg 19/20 stage. So it's it is the master plan with a series of appendices, which include all of the technical reports that we've just.
I knew I'd seen it, but yeah. I just remember where it was. Yeah, it's.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Apologies, Ma'am. So yeah, so all the reports related to the gas main, the drainage, all those technical reports are all in the appendices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay, so the issue that had been raised about the safety of the bridge crossing going over the railway, coming from the pedestrian cycleway crossing. You're saying that signalisation would allow for a pedestrian cycleway pathway to be added to provide that safety. Is that
yes? Yes, ma'am. Can I ask just John Berry just to confirm that, because they're the designers, I'm just the master plan.
I'm not going to bring up the document now because it's going to take me a while to find it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I can look at it afterwards.
Yes, ma'am. Essentially, I confirm that it would, provide a footway, effectively dedicated footway facility, essentially, which would provide a continuous pedestrian connection, essentially, between our new bridge, effectively the entrance to the station. But it wouldn't provide a dedicated kind of cycleway at that point. So cyclists would rejoin the carriageway at that point, as kind of set out within our kind of drawing, essentially. But as stated, effectively, the speeds and the volume of traffic are relatively low at that point, and effectively the improvements, essentially, in terms of signalising, effectively, and creating a shuttle working arrangement would effectively improve the safety, essentially, of cycle movements in that regard. So it would effectively help overcome any concerns in that regard.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in Ms. McCaffrey, because I know you will probably want to just update us on a couple of things.
Yeah, thanks. I've not been listening for the last 10 minutes because I've been off trying to find out some answers. I've spoken to our bridge team and they're going to get back to me within the next half an hour. The initial conversation is whilst the bridge might be slightly bigger and longer than Michael Wood's probably a good example to use, but they will try and pull out others if they can. However, and I won't give you numbers for a second because they're going to go away and get the actual figures, including the TM, which I know was an important question. Then the figure of the 3.7 that's currently quoted would have been significantly more at Michael Wood when you include TM. So when I've got those numbers, I'll raise my hand again and give you that information.
I appreciate that. Thank you for letting us know. We'll be having a break shortly anyway. So and then hopefully we will hear back from you within the next sort of half an hour or so. So that would be very useful. Thank you for that. Mr. Russell, please.
Yes, just to confirm, my colleagues have checked the list of building records and the bridge is not listed. That's what they're telling me. So just to confirm that point.
Thank you. Okay. What I'd like to do is, I think it's coming up to 11 o'clock. I normally take a break at 11. Can we take a break, please? If we can take a 15-minute break and then come back at we'll just go slightly over. So 11:15, and then we'll come back and deal with some other matters. So hopefully we can finalise the discussion on the M5 bridge element. We'd like to have a discussion about the gas main. In that time, I might be able to actually get up the documents that I know are there. It's just getting to them. So, and refer to those. Okay, so we'll be back here at 11:15. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. If we can come back and make a start. Okay, I think we're all back now. Now, before the break, we were still on the M5 bridge. Now, we do want to wait for Ms. McCaffrey to come back with any potential estimated costings, etc., from the National Highways Bridge team. Obviously, that may take a little while to come back.
I am actually back, if that's helpful.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Ms. McCaffrey. That would be useful.
Yeah. So the outturn cost of Michaelwood was 5.9 million. So that's everything, including the traffic management. Michaelwood was developed and built by us, not a developer, and therefore there was no commuted maintenance sum. The traffic management then was £24,000 per week, or £3,500 per day, and that was 191 days for 28 weeks, based on 3 narrow lanes running on the M5. Based on today's costs, that would be £5,000 per day. Again, we didn't have CMS there. Looking at CMS on other structures, and an example I've been given is Witchelstow in Swindon. That was around the 30% cost of the structure. Outturn cost a day for this structure are likely to be 7.5 to 8 million, based on that information I've just shared with you.
So that figure of 7.5 to 8 million, is that inclusive of TM costs?
Inclusive of TM costs. The CMS is going to be variable there, but it inclusive of the TM, assuming it's the same TM that I've just described, so 3 lanes, 3 narrow lanes, and again assuming that would be the same 28-week period. So if that was longer, the cost would go up, and if there are full closures and things, again the cost would go up. So it is slightly variable, and it is quite difficult to fully cost until we've got those plans, but that does give an indication.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bushell, please. And I'll come to Ms. Crew.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to object to the use of those figures. The Michaelwood service station as the complete scheme was inclusive of the demolition of the old pedestrian crossing. Now, that was a reinforced concrete structure that had to be demolished with live lanes underneath it and the service station abutting it on both sides. We've spent quite a lot of time isolating out the cost from that scheme to come up with a comparison and a benchmark for a new bridge. So I think the point here, we've allowed 3.8 million. It doesn't take 28 weeks to insert a new pedestrian road crossing deck over a motorway, but it does take 28 weeks to demolish an old bridge in a constrained area and then insert a new road deck over the top. So it's just to put that there, please. The other point to that as well, just on the traffic management costs. Again, the restriction of lanes is representative of the columns that had to be demolished from the old bridge, which is why the narrowing was required. I suspect narrowing of the carriageways won't be required for the Wieslow Bridge.
Well, I was going to raise that because would it be necessary? I've got the plans in front of me now, because it's easier to talk over a plan than not. So would there need to be any closure or any restrictions on the motorway based on the proposals that are set out for to actually put this? I know that in terms of craning the actual bridge in, of course, that would need to be
Yes.
there would need to be a closure. But other than that, I'm looking at the plans now, and with the bunds and the earthworks that are proposed, which are on land which is that land within the ownership, within the site, or is it within the extent of the motorway verge? I'm just trying to understand that element, or is that completely, I know it's got structure-free elements, etc., but can you just explain that, and whether there will be any restrictions on the motorway other than the craning the bridge in?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, this is obviously, it's high level, so we're looking at the theoretical of what we can do with the bridge without necessarily knowing exactly what the ground conditions is going to be, and also potentially what the regulations might be at the time when we go to construct it. But I don't foresee any reason for us to be able to be using any more land than the land that is already controlled to construct the bridge, save for when the deck of the pedestrian bridge is inserted over the motorway, because clearly for safety reasons there would need to be a closure, not restricting of lanes, but a potentially forced lane.
No, yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah, okay, thank you, Ms. Crew.
Thank you, Inspector. Just to add to what Dwayne is saying, I'm slightly concerned that our discussion and the helpful comments from Ms. McCaffrey appear to be making this a sort of a live commentary on the bridge and the figures. Just to reiterate, we have had discussions with National Highways, and I think, if I'm right, Ms. McCaffrey asked us to clarify who that was. Adrian Simon, Senior Project Manager, Scheme Delivery Southwest. The figures that Dwayne is talking about are have come from Ms. McCaffrey's colleagues at Highways England. Those are the figures that we are using. So I do question whether we need to interrogate Ms. McCaffrey anymore on figures. We are reflecting the figures provided to us by National Highways. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crew. Thank you. Well, I'd actually like to, unless there's any further questions in relation to the M5 bridge and the costings, etc., I'd like to move away from that one. Nobody's got anything else. I would like to move over and have a look at the gas pipeline element and just understand the costings in relation to that, and how those have been created, and whether, and I recognise you've got the gas feasibility study. So it would just be helpful to just understand the costings and what discussions have occurred with the consultants. And I recognise it's been confirmed that the consultants carried out the work on behalf of Wales and West Utilities, and that Wales and West Utilities released the report to the landowners, the site promoters, and therefore that means that they are content with what's set out in that report. I think it would just be useful to just understand the costing element, the viability side of that, just the costing element side of that. I don't know if somebody from the site promoter side can just take me through that.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Mary.
Oh, actually, I think Mr. Bushell's probably better placed than I am, but I think I don't want to reiterate what I said earlier. The costings have been provided to us. They're based on a desktop study by Fingleton White, and the rather generous plus and minus 40% reflects the stage of that desktop study, and those figures would be refined further, but I'm sure Mr. Bushell can add some more detail to that.
Yeah, it could be that we can't have much further discussion on this because that's just the evidence as you've got, and that's it. But it would just be useful if you could just take me through it so that I can understand how those costings have been derived. You know, I've got the document in front of me. If you want to refer to the document, happy to do that.
Okay, so just very as a quick overview then on the way the document's been put together, there are 3 options, again representing the stage of the project. The final option needs to be selected. There are 3 costs. The blended cost of that is the cost that we've allowed within the appraisal documents and the costings. On top of that, then we've added a 10% contingency, because the variability in that blended cost is representative of the 3 options. And within those 3 options are the civil works costs, there's the design costs, there's an element of risk, there's the connection costs, there's the new pipe that needs to go into it, and the 30%, 40%, because it changes from one document to another, but the large and generous contingency amount is really reflective of what Wales and West are anticipating in inflation to be. What inflation generally will affect each one of those headers differently. So we've taken a sensible and scientific approach to just inflating it where it needs to be inflated and insert it into the appraisal.
Thank you. Obviously, the costings are clearly set out in the report. And as you said, they are estimates. Any further questions? Oh, I've got Mr. Toombs, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Inspector. We have made extensive comments on this report, which you received both in the MIQ and in the Reg 19. And we have serious difficulties with it. I won't repeat every difficulty we've got with it, but the fundamental problem is that it is impossible to validate those costs. They are not traceable. Reference is not given to where they've been obtained. And to say that Wales and West Utilities have accepted the report is quite interesting, because if Wales and West Utilities can't validate those costs, how can they possibly accept it? I would merely say that an interesting point, of course, is that WWU are not actually paying for this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Are there any further questions anybody wants to raise in terms of viability and costings on the pipeline? Sorry, I'm just reading some notes. Okay. Anything further on that? No? Okay. Now, the IDP. Now, in previous sessions, we had, or it's been flagged up to us, and issues have been raised about the concerns about IDP figures in relation to infrastructure costings within that. I'm not going to have that discussion today, particularly in relation to the SRN and the strategic road network, motorway junction elements, etc. We're not going to be discussing that today. That's something that myself and my colleague need to consider further in relation to next steps on that particular point. Is there anything that anybody wants to highlight from a viability perspective in relation to this particular site, with that caveat that we're not opening up discussions about costings on the IDP, because we know there are concerns and we know there are whether they're inaccuracies or errors or whatever it is, there are concerns about the figures that are set out within that. And that's something that myself and my colleague need to have further discussion about. Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I just got a few general points that I wanted to make. It's been quite interesting listening to going a bit more in depth to some of these things that we've talked about today. But one of the things that does also concern me, and it's more of the fact that this site has been, and I know that my colleague has already alluded to this, that the site has been promoted, you know, for 5 years, and that this sort of documentation is only coming in at the last minute. You know, I'm really struggling to understand why, if Stroud District Council are so keen on this site to be in the local plan, why have they not insisted upon this quite important, relevant documentation to be there earlier on, like others have done? I also think that the other important aspect for me is the fact that there's no developer for this site as of yet. I know that obviously for a lot of other places, they already have their developer in place. I did note in one of the documents, it says that a developer will be in place in 2024. But, you know, like I said, a lot of other sites already have their developers in place. I think, again, going back to the whole thing of these documents not being or being delivered right at the last minute is actually quite disrespectful to the whole examination process, in my opinion. And I think it also shows a huge lack of respect to our communities that this is going to affect. So I'm not going to go on any longer. Those were just the general points that I wanted to make. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Hills, Mr. Hill, please.
May I just come back on the point that the council mentioned about the developers being on board at this stage, and reiterate what I said at previous examination a couple of months ago, just to make it very clear. The two clients here are responsible landowners with a history of land development processing themselves. One is a charity and one is a government organisation. Both in their statute are duty bound in any land negotiation or sale to maximise the value of development in one point. And bringing a developer on early means discounts or to that developer are requested. We are maturing this site together with the council so that the context of the garden status, the densities, and all the requisite parts that make up the development are considered and moulded by our responsible landowning partners, who themselves have put a team together of expert representatives here today and previously who've been working on this scheme, spending tens of thousands of pounds in working to accommodate development in a suitable manner for the local authority and indeed themselves as a landowner. And as Cook Trust are well known for their land strategies. It is the centre core of their business to do things responsibly. The same can be said to the county. A developer will be brought on board when some of the uncertainty of the planning is diminished, which an allocation will thus do. And the team that are working here today are exactly the same type of team that any developer that's represented at this inquiry are using. They're putting the same reports together with the same money and time and effort and respect, if I may say, to justify this allocation. And hence, at this stage, there is no need. We have clients with deep pockets and deep morals.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
hope that answers the question about bringing on a developer, and my colleague Tim Watson will give you a timetable of that as and when. I'll let Mary come back to the earlier point, if I may.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hill. Ms. Crew?
Thank you, Inspector. If I may just pick up on the point raised by Councillor Green just now. I made some notes. I think she said it was disrespectful for the site promoters to issue the information so late in the day, and I felt I really must come back on that, because that would be completely at odds with the ambitions and the drive of the landowners in respect of Wislow. So I just wanted to labour that point again, if I may, that the master plan that was produced at Regulation 19 is transparent, it's engaging in terms of Wislow and our vision for Wislow. That has sat on a dedicated Wislow website, which has attracted quite a lot of traffic. We've had positive comments. We've engaged to the greatest extent possible, bearing in mind the COVID pandemic, but we've continued to engage on that. So we really have tried to engage in a meaningful way with the community by producing a master plan, and sitting behind that master plan and backing it up is all the technical information which was appended to the master plan, which Mr. Osborne referred to earlier. And in the background, the numbers that we have crunched and crunched again and verified. The fact that those numbers haven't been front and central is because our clients are focused on producing an exemplar master plan for Wislow, which we really feel we have done. There's an exemplar approach, for example, to the drainage situation. We have endorsed the Garden City principles to the fullest extent possible. So rather than starting with numbers first, we have engaged in a very positive placemaking agenda at Wislow, and we feel that speaks volumes through the master plan and also the design code. The numbers are for us to ensure that the scheme works, but it's the master plan that we like to see sort of shine in respect of Wislow. So I hope that helps in that respect to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got several hands up. Mr. Hill, your hands, is that a legacy hand or something you want to add? Thank you, that answered that question. Mr. Russell, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity to reassure Councillor Green that the council has acted proactively throughout the preparation of the local plan to ensure that the sites are truly deliverable and viable. That was a recommendation from our viability consultant from an early stage. And you'll be aware of all the statements of common ground that we've prepared working with the site promoters, including deliverability and viability statements where necessary. So in terms of insisting that we are comfortable with the viability of sites, that's certainly something that the council has been proactive about. In terms of the detailed costings you have, I can't speak for all of the strategic allocations, but you certainly have before you a more detailed development appraisal than many of the strategic sites, and that's no criticism of them. That's simply a reflection, I think, of the, as Mary Crew said, of the transparency with which the promoters are approaching this site. Now, I appreciate that the information is late, and that that's unfortunate. The flip side of that is, of course, that the figures are considered to be up to date in terms of current day costings. And finally, judging by the hearing statement the hearing session we've had so far, again, correct me if I'm wrong, inspectors, but there's been more analysis and detailed consideration of viability in terms of this site than any other site to date. So I think hopefully
we'll be doing the same for Sharpness, don't worry.
No, indeed, but obviously we're looking at the plan as a whole and the number of strategic sites. If you add all the other strategic sites together, then that gives you a feel for the scale of development that's proposed, therefore the importance of viability generally in terms of the local plan. And yes, of course, it's quite right that you should look forensically at these figures, but I just wanted to give the community some comfort that although the figures have come in late, they are being scrutinised in great detail, and we're happy to respond to any points that come out of today's session if further information is required. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Sorry, the other thing to bear in mind is the reason why we are looking more forensically at Winslow, and we'll be doing with Sharpness, as my colleague says, is because obviously these are your larger sites, the new settlements, more infrastructure of a significant scale is proposed. So that's why we're going through it more carefully than, say, the more smaller, less strategic sites. So I just wanted to clarify that there. It's not because we're picking unduly on these two sites in any way. It's just to do with the scale. That's the only reason.
Thank you. I do have a query on the gas pipeline element, but I will just bring in, there's a couple of hands up, and then we're going to be moving on. There's only a couple of points really now that I want to bring on to, which is about the overall viability. So I'll bring in Ms. McCaffrey first, please.
Thank you. Mine isn't about the gas pipeline, it's actually back to the bridge, and I know you've closed
it's fine.
Is okay,
fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just based on those comments, again, I'm not a bridge expert, so I keep stressing that people are listening in the background. Just to make it clear, with Michael Word, the structure was removed over one night and the piers were demolished the following night, but the new piers to build the new bridge then took the remaining time. And then just in regard to the name that was given, Aid Simon, he says he's not spoken to Stantec for quite some years. So again, we have to base those conversations and examples on discussions quite a few years ago. And it wasn't agreed that the structure would cost this much. He gave them examples and they went and did their work. There has been no agreement with National Highways that a structure would cost X.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. That's useful. Mr. Jones, please.
Thank you, Inspector. I've never taken part in a local plan inspection before, but I'm a little surprised at what's happened today. I've been involved previously with the scrutiny of large defence projects at all stages of the life cycle. I have never been in a position to give an opinion in a meeting with 24 hours notice when the document authors, the subject matter experts, are present in large numbers with the data at their fingertips. This has placed WAG in a very difficult position and a considerable disadvantage. I wish that to be registered as a formal point.
Okay.
I am not happy.
I will just
make a few other points if I may.
Well, just bear with me on that point, Mr. Thomas, because the point of these examination hearings is for us two as the inspectors to get the evidence that we need. So you are referring to different forms of, there are obviously different forms of committees and where elements are scrutinised. So I just want to make clear, and I made it clear in the first week, that the purpose, these are mine and my colleagues, this is our examination. We are here to scrutinise the plan as it sits before us, and we request information as and when required. I fully understand your frustration as a local resident and a local group who are very concerned about this site coming forward. And I fully understand the comments that have been made about this being late evidence. But it's actually been, for myself and my colleague, it's been exceptionally useful to have this evidence. And what we did not want to do was turn away evidence at the 11th hour that actually it's been exceptionally useful to go through it this morning and has assisted us quite significantly. Well, so I can't talk for my colleague, but she's on the call.
I agree.
It's been exceptionally useful. So from our perspective, this is really helpful. Now, I fully understand that from a local resident's perspective, this doesn't seem fair, but this is about an examination of a local plan. And what's important is that myself and my colleague get the information that we need. That doesn't take away from the fact that, quite rightly so, you want to be involved in the process. You are here to give your representations based on your regulation 19, regulation 20 submissions, not taking into effect that additional evidence has been brought out. Now, as I said earlier, and I don't want to repeat myself, sometimes this just happens. It happens during an examination. That's why we're taking it in our stride, because it's actually quite normal. And quite rightly said, you said you haven't, been involved in an examination before. It does happen quite often that information is brought in, because it's about providing myself and my colleague with that evidence. And if it's going to help us to understand from the landowner's perspective or the site promoter's perspective, obviously we have our own queries and questions and concerns, which hopefully, that we have questioned today. And we will take on board everything else that's been said as well. So, but I fully understand your frustrations with this process. But an examination is a bit of a moving feast, as you're fully aware. It's been ongoing for some time now. And it's still ongoing. The examination doesn't finish until we produce our report. So it's something that will just keep moving on. So I'm hoping that that gives you an element of comfort that we are not, myself and my colleague are not being hoodwinked by this information coming in, and we have queries and questions, and we have experience from from having done local plan work before. We have significant experience, well, substantial experience of doing that. So we know the tricks and the issues that come up. So I hope you, this is not our first rodeo. Let's put it that way. So having a late evidence, very frustrating for local residents and organisations who want to have the time to have a look at it. But as I said, we only looked at it last night as well, but we're taking it in our stride, because what's important is we get to go through this morning what has been said, go through the figures, and that's been really helpful to myself and my colleague. So, and as I said, we will take away whether we want anybody else to comment on it or not. You've had an opportunity to comment on it during this session. I recognise you've not had time to digest. We need to go away and digest the information that we've heard. And then if we want further comments, we will ask for that, but we're not asking for that now. So hopefully that gives you an element of comfort, Mr. Thomas. Yes?
Could I make just two other points?
Sorry.
First one is we were quite encouraged, actually, that the abnormals which have now been quantified are pretty much in agreement with our original WAG submission. Unfortunately, there's one estimate which has been missed out, and that is the cost of the upgrades to the railway level crossings, which could be quite significant. That's my first point.
Thank you.
The second point, in EB 111 at paragraph 919, it says that strategic sites have been modelled in line with information provided by Stroud Council, and that modelling is consistent with the Council's wider development assumptions. Also, Mr. Russell has stressed on several occasions the importance of judging the sites on an equal basis. The modelling in the Seville's report doesn't follow this standard modelling, so I can't see how these sites can be compared. It's interesting to note that in the 2022 viability analysis, on EB 111, if in fact you model, for example, we reverse engineered the spreadsheets which were not provided by the council. And in fact, if you model PS37 on the input data for PS24, and if you think they're just on opposite sides of the motorway, they're separated by 35 meters, you'll find that the residual land value for PS37 shifts considerably and in fact ends up negative. Now, there are other issues as well. And then when you consider the unquantified aspects regarding the junction improvements on the motorways, it would indicate that PS37 simply is not viable. I cannot see how this can be judged if EB 111, which was the original modelling, is ignored. And WAG is quite happy to provide you with a report on our views on this and why we think PS37 is not viable.
We're not requesting any further information at this time. I've already said that.
Thank you, Inspector. I realise.
I recognise that you're there in the wings, just in case.
I'm making the offer if required.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
And one other thing that I think is quite significant, and it reflects the view of Councillor Green, is this lack of a developer, regardless of what was said earlier about it can be explained. But the conclusion I've come to is that even if PS37 does appear in the local plan, I think it's most unlikely that it would ever be developed, simply because all of the local developers must have done their due diligence and come to the conclusion the site simply is not viable. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. That's been really, really helpful. Thank you. Mr. Bushell, please.
Oh, thank you. I don't mean to break the flow at all, and I'm not necessarily sure that the toing and froing on the bridge is helpful or not, particularly when it's live via proxy. But there are 2 points I just want to make. The first one is we're not at all assuming that National Highways are going to be delivering the bridge on our behalf. It was simply a benchmark, and to make the point, National Highways agree that it is a good contemporaneous project to use for comparison purposes, and we've isolated the decks. That's the important piece. The next part is, as I've mentioned, it is fundamentally different in that there is demolition, there's the installation of new columns, and there's going to be obstructions in the ground afterwards. It's also not clear whether things like taxes have been, like VAT, for example, has been removed out of the cost that have been provided. So I think, just to make the point, I think we could be comparing apples and pears, and I'm not sure necessarily it's helpful. And that was it. I'll make way for the response to.
I think we've got that point, Mr. Bushell. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, please.
Just coming back on the point of viability to, if I may, to Councillor Thompson. I think it's proved evidently throughout this. You've been mentioning costs that go up and down. I reiterate the fact that we have been conservative on our resale figures, conservative on all points of cost, as Mark also said from Stroud. So if we were to add those in, we have got higher figures, but in our professional capacity, we'd like to under-promise and over-deliver. If we over-promise something, we're only going to be found out by the landowners and disappointing the local authority further down the line. In terms of the developer interest, I completely refute those comments. We've had, ever since this was identified in a plan, numerous unsolicited approaches with partners that would like to be part of the process. And in the fullness of time, they will be. This will be a very sought after standalone opportunity to build something of merit for the authority, the landowners and the developers further to the allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Would just a question, I've just been checking my notes, and there was a question that I wanted to make just about the high pressure gas pipeline. And it is a little bit detailed. So, and I just want to understand, not being a high pressure gas pipeline expert, as you can imagine, I just want to understand the implications, or whether there are any implications at all with, because it's an existing straight gas pipeline that runs through the site, whether there are any implications either related to costs or in terms of just how it works for putting in lots of or various different joints that would obviously, because it would have to bend and turn, and because it's going to follow a different route. I just, for my own benefit, I'm sure others may not be interested in this, but I'd just like to understand what if there are any implications for that. So I'm not looking at the costings in terms of that, but is it, I know it's feasible in terms of what's been set out in the feasibility study, but can it just be explained to me whether there are any implications for how the pipeline works, costings relating to, and well, not presuming, but just the costings for having to sort of, I'm assuming that the pipeline would be put in, the new pipeline, whilst the existing one still is in use. Please tell me whether that's right or not, and how that works. So just because I'm probably going to be a bit nosy, I just want to understand how that actually works and whether it has any implications on costings or viability or the deliverability of the scheme, because that gas pipeline is supposed to be done at a very early stage. So I'm just trying to understand, how does that work within? So is Mr. Bushell?
Yeah. Again, strategically at high level, it's not unusual to have diversions of underground services. It's unusual.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
But it happens at lots of places. So essentially, what would happen is we'll have all the civil work for the new route cut out. The new pipe will be laid, and then the technical piece, which I can't inform on because it is technical, but the connection then will be made into the existing pipe. And then the section that is then made redundant will be subject to whether Wales and West want to leave it in situ or take it out. But again, that's detail.
Okay.
So
so there is an option there for them to leave it in situ, but if it's not in use, then it doesn't. Does it in any way impede development then of the site?
I think it would be difficult. It is almost impossible to comment on that without somebody that's technically able to comment upon it.
No, that's fair enough. I'm probably going a little bit more technical. It was something that, but in terms of viability, in terms of the costings and the deliverability of the scheme, you're proposing to do the gas pipeline at an early stage, so yes. Therefore the site won't be developed out or anything. So there's an ease of actually carrying out the works, isn't there?
Correct. Yes, it'll be done as part of his enabling package. And before first completion.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I suppose then. Oh, Mr. Toms. Well, you're on mute. Do you want to put your microphone on? I can't hear you.
My apologies.
That's okay. Don't worry. We all do it.
Really, I want to come back on the pipeline, really to satisfy your curiosity regarding a couple of items. Yes, you cannot stop the flow. It carries on, so you put a diversion around it, etc. One of the most important things about these pipelines is they are dangerous things. There was an explosion in Belgium in 2004, which killed 15 people and caused extensive damage. This was underneath a car park. It wasn't in the middle of a housing development. And because of that, it's absolutely vital that these pipelines are inspected routinely. And if this thing is buried underneath a bund, which itself is a serious concern, they use something known as a PIG, which is a pipeline inspection
I know what
gauge.
that is, yeah.
Good.
I watched
and basically that shoots up the inside of the pipeline and examines the inside of it. So a very efficient and very effective and cost-effective way of doing it. Unfortunately, if you have bends in the pipeline, a PIG is not necessarily usable in that section. And obviously looking at the design of that pipeline and the bends in it, there are an enormous number of very, very sharp bends. So I think there could be problems pigging it. Thank you very much.
I like that term. I might have to use that in the future. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. That's useful. Mr. Osborne, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Sorry, again, I noticed that John had put his hand up, so John Berry said maybe that he's better positioned to into this. And like Mr. Tom's on this pipelines, the options that are shown in the appendix report are not fixed. There's an alignment that's shown in the master plan, which again is not fixed because it's an illustrative master plan at this stage, but that shows the gas pipeline running on the northern face of the bund, as we recognise that the pipeline couldn't sit underneath the bund because that would cause problems with future access and maintenance. But it could also run on the southern side of the bund along the edge of the motorway, and then Bundby could be moved in because it's only a 6-metre easement for the new pipeline, whereas the existing pipeline's got a 80 to 100-metre easement. So I guess that the point is that the technical work that's being done by Singleton White are competent engineers with lots of experience in gas pipelines. So they've set out these options which they are recommending are deliverable and technically viable. And then there'll be further technical work done should the site be allocated and the scheme possible to make sure that it is safe and deliverable and being able to look after in the future. So the viability and the costings that are allowed for at this stage are at the right level of the stage, and they demonstrate it can be achieved. And then the actual fine tuning of that is what we'll come forward at the next stage.
Thank you.
I don't
Did you
know,
want
sorry.
to bring Mr. Berry in? Mr. Berry would like to come in? Yeah.
Yes, Mum, I was just going to reiterate the point that Paul made, that obviously the gas main report has been produced by a specialist consultant who are a dedicated consultant for Wales and West, essentially. So it's been a well-considered, effective proposition that as we've discussed, has been signed off by Wales and West in terms of costings and in terms of the alignments, essentially. So I think, obviously, to suggest, essentially, that there would be kind of risks associated with those, without obviously there being effectively a specialist effectively view to take to support some of those points that have been made, I think would be somewhat kind of wide of the mark, essentially. And I think obviously we should deal with effectively the specialist report that is effectively within the library, essentially, to support effectively the case that has been made, and effectively the fact that it is feasible to divert, and effectively that appropriate costs have been put to it by specialists.
Thank you. Mr. Osborne?
Sorry, man, that's a legacy hand.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Mr. Thomas, please. Oh, you're on mute. Do you want to take your microphone off again? It's a Friday, and it's a Friday. It's a Friday, and it's a Friday afternoon now. So
I really must come back. I really must come back on these statements regarding the gas pipeline inspection, the report and the cost thereof, and the derivation of those costs. I would expect in any professionally competent report that those costs are traceable. It is not possible to find out where those costs have come from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, any response to that? Does anybody want to make a response? I know that comment's been made before. I will give the opportunity if anybody wants to respond from the site promoters' perspective. Mr. Osborne,
okay. John and I both come in. We'd have to go back to the consultant, but they are experienced engineers who are doing this type of work. So I would assume that they are basing their costs on similar projects that they've been undertaking in the time they're preparing the report. They're not just going to drafted out a figure and said it's going to cost 2 million just because that's what we think. They've got an evidence base, and they've looked at the lengths of the different options that have informed the cost and the junctions that have to be produced. But if we wanted to go into more detail of that, and subject to what Mr. Berry might say, we would need to ask someone from Singleton White to come and join us and explain the detail of their cost estimates. But as competent professionals, with the kind of, as we all have as professionals, our professional requirements and codes of conduct, they wouldn't just be putting figures in there that they've made up off the top of their head.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. I'd like to just move on to just look at the viability of the scheme as a whole. So I'd just like to understand the profit margins, and if costs and sales values, so looking at, it's about the outputs, it's about the inputs as well as the outputs, isn't it? How viable, just to get a feel, I'd like to understand from the site promoter's perspective, how viable is this at this stage? You've got the, you've given a percentage profit. and you set that out. If costs increase for whatever reason, and I recognise that sales would increase as well to a certain extent, and to a certain extent some costings may well go down. We don't know at this stage. How viable is the scheme at the moment from the site promoter's perspective?
Mum, if I may, the site is assessed as viable. It is a snapshot at a moment in time. You're right, costs could go up, but we have contingencies and tolerances within that. Equally, as you say, sales values could equally go up as well. Appraisals are very sensitive to small changes in any number of inputs. So we think our appraisals are conservative and with plenty of room for tolerance, which will hopefully give you comfort in respect of rising costs, as you say.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'll just ask my colleague. Do you have any further questions on viability?
No, I don't know.
Any other questions anybody wants to raise to viability? Because I'm going to be drawing this session to a close, really. I will give an opportunity for final comments on this site allocation to be made if anybody wishes to make them. But I don't want repetition of anything that we've heard previously, obviously, and in previous sessions. And then I will just give the council final say if they wish to say anything and whether they go to the site promoters rather than respond themselves. But I will go to Mr. Russell at the end. Mr. Thomas, please.
I unmuted this time. A very interesting comment has just been made, and that is regarding the sensitivity of these models to input variables. One of the things that we discovered when we were looking at the spreadsheets for these things is the incredible sensitivity to the input variables. Very minor changes can have massive effects on the viability. And the second thing is, I'm curious now as to what the status is of EB 111. Is it still the master document determining the viability of these various sites, establishing the level playing field on which they are judged, or is it totally redundant now?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Russell?
Thank you. Yes. Well, firstly, as the inspectors know, there is a specific session on viability of the local plan as a whole, which is at the end of the examination process. I obviously don't know when we'll be there yet, but our viability consultant will be there to talk specifically to EB 111, which is a high-level viability report of the plan as a whole. Now, you'll see if you go through that report, firstly, that table 10.2F, Winslow is actually one of the better performing sites in terms of that level playing field that Mr. Thomas has mentioned, with full infrastructure costs included. And the session that we will have will go through that document, I'm sure, in some detail. One of the most important things, though, is that the author of that report recommends that the council undertakes detailed discussions with promoters, and that we rely on promoters' detailed appraisals in terms of demonstrating the viability of individual sites. And so this is really for Mr. Tom's benefit. EB 111 provides the overview, the high-level overview as the plan as a whole, and the promoters for every site, strategic site, new settlement, it's about them preparing a much more detailed assessment based upon their initial master planning work and their technical documents. So they are complementary to each other. They don't have to be entirely consistent because they have a different role to play. One is high level for the plan as a whole. The other is a detailed assessment based upon the individual site circumstances. And this is essentially the detailed assessment that we've gone through today in terms of Winslow. But there is, rest assured, Mr. Tom's, a session at the end of the plan examination where all of the elements of viability deliverability come together in terms of whether the plan as a whole is viable. And that's a specific question which the inspectors have asked, and no doubt we'll get to that point at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Ms. Crew?
Thank you. If I may, Inspector, you mentioned closing remarks, and I just wanted to make some very briefly on behalf of the Ennis Cook Trust and, of course, Gloucestershire County Council. We just wanted to take the opportunity to reflect positively on the local plan process, which we've been engaged with for some time, working closely with Mr. Russell and obviously Stroud District Council. We've been fully engaged in that process, and we have developed a robust master plan underpinned by a raft of technical information, which we could discuss at some length, and we have. We're confident that that master plan and also the accompanying design code more than adequately delivers the policy for Winslow, and that is the ultimate aim of the local plan, essentially to meet those policy requirements, which we have done. Further to that, one issue we haven't talked about is the long-term stewardship of Winslow, and we're rightly proud of how that's been established. We've taken our cues from Homes England on Garden City stewardship principles. So Winslow will achieve a long-term positive legacy for Stroud, and we're very pleased and proud to be part of that. We intend to fully engage with the council, obviously, and with the process for the local plan going forward. But just to thank the opportunity for being able to be part of that process to date. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further that the council wants to add or comment on?
Just to endorse the comments made around the council working proactively with site promoters on this site. We consider they've done a lot of good work around the master planning and the design codes. We talked in detail about viability. We're confident that the scheme is viable given what we know at this stage and appropriate to the level of in the planning process. Obviously, there will be more detail to get into later in the process. Just to point out that although we've covered viability today, the additional information does include some additional information on deliverability and in time frame and timescales. Obviously, that's not for discussion now, but just to highlight that we've been in further discussions with the promoters to ensure that the timescale from planning application submission to first dwelling on site, which is just under 5 years in the new timescale, is appropriate. It can be demonstrated, for example, the Great Oldbury site, the Hitchens information that you've been provided with, entirely in accordance with that time frame. But obviously, if there's any further discussion you wish to have on those timeframes, or indeed the housing trajectory as a whole, then obviously we're happy to have those discussions at a later date. And finally, just to say to local community members here that, you know, whatever happens in terms of the local plan, the process doesn't stop here, that there will be further discussions, opportunities for consultation for local communities to help shape the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, on the previous session in May, we did have a discussion on deliverability. I recognise it's moved on slightly from that. It's set out, the delivery and the phasing is all very clearly sort of set out in the document, because it's a viability and deliverability document. I wasn't going to raise queries and questions about that, because it's very much something that we were going to discuss when we come to deal with the trajectory as a whole and looking at, and it's something that me and my colleague need to consider further as to exactly where the strategic site allocations sit within the trajectory and taking on board the evidence. So we need to just take that away and have a look at that. So it's not something that the council needs to do anything about at the moment. Okay, thank you. So if there's nothing further on Winslow, it doesn't mean that we won't necessarily come back to consider talking about Winslow in relation to the overall trajectory or any other aspects. Is something that myself and my colleague need to consider once we've gone through the other new settlement and the other site allocations that we've got next week, which are the employment allocations. And then it will give us a little bit of time to actually just consider all of the additional evidence that's been brought forward and the comments that have been made in the hearing sessions before we decide what the next steps should be. So thank you very much for your contributions. It's been very, very useful this morning. So thank you. I hope you have a lovely weekend. And I will see whoever is back next Wednesday when we have our discussion sharpness. So thank you for now, and I'll see whoever next week.